Notification comes through at 6:47 in the morning. I know because I was already awake. I'd been lying there for 20 minutes watching the ceiling fan turn, thinking about nothing in particular, the way you do when your body decides sleep is finished, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. My phone lit up on the nightstand and I reached for it out of habit. It was a text from my mother. Sweetheart, your father and I need to talk to you this weekend. Sunday dinner. Don't make plans. That was it. No emoji. No love you. My mother always ends texts with love you. I read it 3 times, set the phone face down on the nightstand, and stared at the ceiling for another 10 minutes. I told myself I was overthinking it. I was not overthinking it. Some background, because context matters here. My name is Avery. I'm 31. I work in healthcare administration at a mid-size hospital system in Ohio, which is not glamorous but pays well, and I'm genuinely good at it. I've been with my fiancé, Joel, for 4 years. We got engaged 14 months ago at a state park in western Pennsylvania where we'd taken our first road trip together. He packed a picnic, forgot the wine opener, and proposed with a ring he'd spent 3 months quietly researching because he knew I hate anything flashy. It was very him. I said yes before he finished the sentence. My brother is 34. He lives 40 minutes away with his wife, Cassidy. They got married 3 years ago in a ceremony that cost, and I want to be precise here, $68,000. I know this because my parents paid for approximately 40,000 of it. Happily, proudly, without a single conversation about whether that was a reasonable amount of money to spend. My father gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner about how my brother deserved the world. My mother cried. I sat at table 6 and drank my champagne and told myself families are complicated, and this was just how things were. The remaining 28,000 came from a fund my maternal grandparents had set up years ago. Equally split. Meant for both of us. My share, $14,000, was sitting in a joint account my parents had managed since my grandmother passed. I'd never touched it. I didn't need to. I'd been saving my own money, building toward a wedding that Joel and I had talked about keeping small. 30 people, maybe 40. A venue that meant something to us, nothing like my brother's wedding by choice. That fund was mine. My grandparents had said so explicitly. My mother had confirmed it when I got engaged. She'd sat across from me at her kitchen table and said, "Your grandmother would have wanted you to have something beautiful." I thought about that sentence a lot after Sunday dinner. I drove to my parents' house alone that afternoon. Joel offered to come. I told him it was probably nothing, some family administrative thing. Maybe they wanted to update their wills or talk about the holidays. He looked at me the way he sometimes does, steady and quiet, like he's doing math in his head. "Call me after," he said. My parents live in the same house I grew up in, a colonial in a suburb that has gotten noticeably nicer since the early 2000s. My mother had recently repainted the front door burgundy. I stood on the porch for a moment before ringing the bell, which I do sometimes even though it's my childhood home, because I've learned that you don't always get to just walk into situations. Dinner was pot roast. My mother had made a salad and rolls from scratch. The table was set the way she sets it when something is being celebrated or softened. Nice napkins, the good glasses. My brother and Cassidy were already there when I arrived. Nobody mentioned that. We ate for 20 minutes making conversation about nothing. The weather, my brother's new truck, a show my parents had been watching. I moved my food around my plate and waited. My father put his fork down. He said, "We want to talk to you about the fund." I set my water glass down carefully. "Okay, your brother and Cassidy have had a rough year financially." He paused. "The business has been slow. They've got the house payment, the car payments. Cassidy's been dealing with some medical bills." I looked at my brother. He was looking at his plate. "We talked it over," my father continued, "and we decided it made the most sense to consolidate both shares of your grandmother's fund and give it to your brother right now. When you and Joel get married, we'll contribute what we can from our savings." The room went very quiet. I said, "You already did it." It wasn't a question, the way he said we decided. Past tense, settled, finished. My mother reached across the table. "Avery, your grandmother would have understood. Family takes care of family. You and Joel are both employed, you're stable. That was my money." My voice came out flat. I didn't mean it to sound that way. Grandma set it up for me. It had my name on it. It was a family fund, my brother said. He was still looking at his plate. I turned to him. You knew about this. He didn't answer. How long? I asked. How long have you known? Cassidy touched his arm. Nobody answered me. I put my napkin on the table and stood up. My mother called my name twice as I walked to the front door. I closed it behind me without slamming it because I am 31 years old and I have spent a significant portion of my life not slamming doors in that house. And some habits don't break even when everything else does. I sat in my car in their driveway for 4 minutes. Then I drove home. Joel was on the couch when I got back. He took one look at my face and didn't say anything, just moved over and waited. I told him everything, all of it, in order, without crying, which surprised me. I felt like I was describing something that had happened to someone else. The pot roast, the good napkins, my father's careful past tense. When I finished, Joel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When did they move the money?" I didn't know. I said so. "Okay," he said. That was all. I went to bed early that night and stared at the ceiling again and thought about my grandmother. She'd been a practical woman. She'd grown up without much, worked her whole adult life, and left behind exactly what she intended to leave behind. She used to tell me, "You don't let anyone make you feel like you're asking for too much when you're asking for what's yours." I was 17 when she said that. I wrote it in a notebook I still have somewhere. I fell asleep eventually. In the morning, there was an email from my mother. I read it standing in my kitchen in my socks before coffee. It was long, longer than any email my mother had ever sent me. It was also not entirely written in her voice. There were phrases and constructions in there that sounded like they'd been worked over, softened, shaped. I read it twice and I thought, Cassidy helped write this. The email said that I had always been resistant to sharing within the family. It referenced a Thanksgiving 3 years ago when I had allegedly refused to help pay for my parents' flight to visit my brother. I have absolutely no memory of this incident because it did not happen. The email said that I had always known the fund was a family resource and that my expectation of receiving it solely was a misunderstanding. It said that my reaction at dinner had been hurtful to my parents and that I owed my father an apology. I forwarded it to Joel. He called me 11 seconds later. "Save everything," he said. "Every email, every text. Don't delete anything." "Joel, I'm serious, Avery. Save everything right now." I screenshot the email. I saved it to 2 folders. I went back through my text history with my mother and screenshot the conversation from 14 months ago where she had explicitly confirmed the fund was mine. "Your grandmother would have wanted you to have something beautiful." Right there. Time stamped. I sent those to Joel too. I didn't understand yet what he was doing. I would understand later. The next 2 weeks were quiet in a way that felt like pressure. My parents didn't call. My brother didn't call. I got a text from Cassidy that said simply, "I hope you can find peace with this." I stared at that text for a long time. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. I did not respond. I went to work. I came home. I ran 3 miles every morning in my neighborhood while it was still gray outside because I needed somewhere to put the feeling and I had to be functional by 8 a.m. Joel was doing something. I could tell because he got quiet in a particular way he gets when he's working through a problem. Not distant, just focused. He's an operations manager for a logistics company, which sounds boring, but what it actually means is that he's very good at understanding systems, at seeing exactly where and how something went wrong, and at documenting the sequence of events clearly enough that other people can see it too. I asked him once what he was doing. He said, "Making sure we understand the full picture before we decide anything." I let it go. What I did not let go of, I went to my bank and confirmed what I already suspected. The joint account my parents had managed, the one containing my grandmother's money, had been emptied 6 weeks earlier, 6 weeks before Sunday dinner. Before they told me, while I was planning my wedding, picking out invitations, talking with Joel about venues, my parents had already transferred my inheritance to my brother's account. They had let me believe the money was still there for 6 weeks. I sat in the bank parking lot and thought about every conversation I'd had with my mother during those 6 weeks. The phone calls. The time she'd asked about the venue and said she was excited to see what we chose. The Sunday I'd gone over for lunch and she'd shown me a photo she'd saved of a floral arrangement she thought I might like. She had looked me in the eyes and talked about my wedding while knowing what they had done. I drove home. I called Joel. He picked up on the first ring. 6 weeks, I said. A pause. I know. You already knew? I found out yesterday. I wanted to confirm it before I told you. How did you? I'll explain tonight. Come home. There is a thing that happens when you realize the full shape of something. Not just the piece you were handed at dinner, not just the email, but the whole structure of it. The planning, the timeline, the decision to smile at you for 6 weeks while the account sat empty. It's not anger exactly. It's more like the moment your eyes adjust in a dark room and you can finally see the furniture, all of it, exactly where it is. Joel explained it that evening. He'd spoken with a friend of his, someone he'd grown up with who was now a practicing attorney in Columbus, not as a formal consultation, just a conversation exploratory to understand what the situation actually was. The fund had been set up by my grandparents with explicit language. I was a named beneficiary. My parents had been listed as custodians, managers of the account, not owners. The distinction matters. A custodian does not have the legal authority to redirect a beneficiary's funds to a third party without the beneficiary's consent. What my parents had done had a name. Joel said the word carefully. I made him say it again. It could be characterized as misappropriation of funds, he said. At minimum, depending on the original trust documents. I said, we need to find those documents. I already requested them, he said. I asked your grandmother's former attorney's office for a copy. They're mailing them this week. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not dramatically. There just weren't any chairs close enough, and my legs needed a moment. Joel sat down next to me on the kitchen floor. We stayed like that for a while. The documents arrived on a Thursday. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table. Joel sat across from me. The language was formal and old, the kind of legal writing that takes 3 readings to fully absorb, but the central provisions were clear enough. The fund had been divided into 2 equal shares upon my grandmother's death. Each share was designated individually by name. My share was mine. My parents' role as custodians was defined with specific limitations. They could manage the account, handle administrative tasks, and in cases of documented hardship, they could release funds early to the named beneficiary. There was no provision allowing them to transfer one beneficiary's share to another. None. I photographed every page. I emailed the photos to Joel, to myself, and to a second email address I created specifically for this purpose. Then I called my parents. My father answered. He sounded cautious, like he'd been expecting the call, but not quite yet. I said, I have the trust documents. Silence. I know what your role as custodian did and did not allow you to do, I said. I know you transferred the funds 6 weeks before you told me. I know you had a lawyer or someone help my mother write that email. More silence. I'm not calling to yell at you, I said. I'm calling to tell you that Joel and I have spoken with an attorney. We understand what our options are, and I want you to understand that too. My father said, Avery, this is family business. It stopped being just family business when you moved money that wasn't legally yours to move. He said they'd done what they had to do. He said my brother needed it more than I did. He said my grandmother would have wanted the family taken care of. I said, I'll be in touch. I hung up. My hands were completely steady. I noticed that. Joel made the call 2 days later. I wasn't in the room when he made it. He'd asked if I wanted to be, and I'd said no, and I'd gone and sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee and let him handle it. This is something I've had to learn, that letting someone help you is not the same as being weak. Joel had spent 2 weeks building a careful, documented understanding of exactly what had happened and exactly what it meant, and he was better positioned to make that call than I was. He spoke with my parents and my brother on a 3-way call. He was, by all accounts, very calm. He laid out what we had: the trust documents, the timeline, the text evidence, the bank records, without raising his voice. He explained that we had already consulted with an attorney. He gave them a specific window of time to return the funds in full with interest directly to an account in my name. He said the window was 72 hours. He told them that if the funds were not returned within that window, we would pursue every available legal remedy, and that the documentation we had assembled was thorough enough that we were confident in that process. My brother said, apparently, you're seriously going to sue your own family over money? Joel said, I'm giving you 72 hours to do the right thing. Then he came outside and sat next to me and drank some of my coffee without asking, which he always does, and told me what had been said. I looked at the backyard for a while. The neighbor's dog was doing its evening patrol of the fence line. What do you think they'll do? I said. I think they'll return it, Joel said. Why? Because the alternative is worse, and your father knows it. He was right. 41 hours later, my father called me directly. He did not apologize. I want to be accurate about that. He said the funds would be transferred back. He said he hoped we could move forward. He said this had all gotten out of hand. I said, please make sure the transfer is complete by tomorrow morning. It was 14,000 and some dollars, returned to an account in my name, plus a small amount representing what should have been months of earned interest. I transferred it immediately to a separate account Joel and I had opened together the week before. Neither of us said anything dramatic about it. We just confirmed the transfer had cleared and then made dinner. There's a version of this story where I tell you I forgave everyone, and we all healed and the family came back together stronger. That version is not what happened. My brother texted me a week later. He said he was sorry things had gone the way they had. He said it had been a hard year. He said he hoped I understood. I told him I understood that it had been a hard year. I also told him that understanding someone's circumstances doesn't mean you agree with what they did inside those circumstances. I told him we would be okay eventually, but that okay eventually was going to take some time and I needed him to respect that. He said okay. I believe he meant it. My parents have been harder. My mother called 3 times in the 2 weeks after the transfer. The first call I let go to voicemail. The second I answered briefly. The third I answered and we talked for 22 minutes about something and nothing. She asked about the wedding planning. I answered in general terms. It was not comfortable, but it was a start maybe. I don't know yet. Some things take longer to see clearly. What I know is this. Joel and I got married 4 months ago. Small, exactly the way we'd always planned. 34 people in a restored farmhouse an hour outside the city. I wore a dress I found on my 3rd try, and my best friend did my hair, and Joel cried a little when I walked in, which he absolutely denies. My grandmother's money paid for the flowers, the food, and 1 extra night at the inn where we stayed after the ceremony. I thought about her the whole weekend. Her practicality. Her certainty about what was hers and what wasn't. You don't let anyone make you feel like you're asking for too much when you're asking for what's yours. I danced with my husband to a song we'd chosen together on a Tuesday night 6 months earlier, standing in our kitchen with the radio on. And I thought, this is what she meant. Not the money. Not even the wedding. The lighthouse turns. The result is always, eventually, the same. You find your way back to what was yours all along. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story, not the surface of it, not the money, not the phone calls, not the 72 hours, the thing underneath it. What happened was simple, and it wasn't simple at all. A set of people made a choice. They assumed I wouldn't look closely. They assumed that love, the particular kind of love you have for your family, the kind that makes you want to believe the best about people, would keep me from asking the hard questions. They assumed that family was a word that could be used to close a conversation instead of open one. They were wrong. And the reason they were wrong wasn't luck. There's something I've come to understand about how situations like this actually unfold. The outcome wasn't decided when Joel made that call. It wasn't decided when I found the trust documents or when I sat in the bank parking lot doing the math on 6 weeks of silence. It was decided much earlier, in every small moment where I chose not to look away from what was true, where I saved the text instead of deleting it, where I asked the question even when I was afraid of the answer. That accumulation of honest choices, that's what made the ending possible. The ending didn't come from nowhere. It came from that. I think about Joel a lot when I think about this. Not the dramatic version of Joel, not the 72 hours phone call. The version of him who sat on the kitchen floor next to me when my legs gave out. The version who said, save everything, before I understood why. He didn't fix this for me. He built the conditions where I could face it clearly and make decisions from a place of information rather than panic. That's a different thing. That's the kind of quiet intelligence that doesn't look impressive in a 2-sentence summary, but is, I've come to believe, the most important quality a person can have in a crisis. And Cassidy. I think about her too. The email she helped write, the text about finding peace. I don't carry anger about any of it anymore, but I do carry the lesson. The people who behave worst in these situations are usually operating from fear of not having enough, fear of being seen, fear of what happens if the story gets examined too closely. That fear makes people do things they would not otherwise do. Understanding that hasn't made me naive about it, but it has made me less interested in making their fear the center of my own story. What I came away with, beyond the $14,000, beyond the wedding at the farmhouse, beyond any of the specific outcomes, is this: your integrity in hard moments is not a sacrifice. It's an investment. Every time I chose the honest path in those weeks, every time I documented instead of reacted, asked instead of assumed, held the line without cruelty, I was building something that couldn't be taken. Not a trust fund, something better. A clear record of who I was when it mattered. My grandmother understood this. She left behind exactly what she intended, in language precise enough that it protected me 30 years later. That's a form of wisdom I want to carry forward, not just in money, in everything. You don't get to choose what people do to you, but you get to choose what you do with it every single time.